Hey AP World students, this is High Level History and I'm Amanda and I'm going to help you earn college credit for AP World. So we're looking at period 3, we're in 600 to 1450 and this is all about key concept 3.2. So if you haven't yet watched 3.1, you should go back and watch that one and then stay tuned for 3.3 right after. So hit subscribe on this channel so that you can be updated about future videos that I post, and follow me on Twitter. It's at HighLevHistory for more tips and tricks to help you pass this exam. So let's jump on in. I'm going to jump up into the corner up here. So key concept 3.2 is all about politics and state building. In 3.1, we talked about the major trading empires, right? The Islamic empires, the Mongols, the Vikings, and then a little bit about the Byzantines. And so in this key concept, we're going to kind of break down what was going on in each empire. What are some of the major characteristics? How did they rise? How did they fall? And really focus in on the politics of period 3. So we're going to kind of go through each one, and as we do, we'll touch on the things that you should know about them. Keep in mind, I'm going to put the dates on here, but dates are not something that you absolutely have to know for the AP World exam. They can be evidence points for you on like the LEQ, for example, but you don't have to remember all the dates. So the Islamic Caliphates is the first of the post-classical empires that we're going to dig into. In terms of the Islamic Caliphates, there's the Umayyads and the Abbasids, and there's also the Delhi Sultanate that is in India. And then in Spain, there's the Al-Andalus, which is the like Cordoba region of Spain that is conquered by the Islamic empires in this time. And really the thing to know about the Islamic empires is they're really big on trade. Part of that is the influence that was from Muhammad, because Muhammad was a merchant, and so there's a big emphasis on trade, and then also a big emphasis on conquest. So a little bit about, let's kind of break down like specifically about the Umayyads and the Abbasids. Both of these empires were Sunni, so the split had already happened between Sunni and Shia, and both of them are Sunni, and so that means that they believed that the leader of the Islamic Caliphates did not have to descend from Muhammad. The Umayyads their capital was in Damascus, whereas the Abbasids' capital was in Baghdad. So there was a little bit of a shift there. Both of them spoke Arabic, and the Umayyads would really like tax the non-Muslims, so pretty tolerant, and you didn't have to be Muslim to live in the Islamic Caliphate. However, you did have to pay an extra tax. They're the ones that expanded into Spain, into North Africa. They ruled Cordoba. And then how do they fall? They lose power to a growing Shia population and non-Muslims in the caliphate. And so they eventually lose a battle to a descendant of Muhammad, and that kind of ends up losing some of the influence that they had. Whereas the Abbasids, who come right after, they are really important in terms of preserving the classical knowledge of like the Romans and the Greeks. A lot of that, like why it lasts into beyond the 13th century, is because of the Abbasid Empire. They're going to introduce things like credit, and they take on paper money from the Chinese, and they are going to fall because of the Mongols. So they are eventually toppled by the Mongols when they invade Baghdad. So here's an example of what the architecture looked like in Spain, the Islamic architecture. And you can see this all over Spain, especially southern Spain today, where you have very ornate, detailed carvings and tiles of all different colors. It's really beautiful. So this is what that looks like. Then the Mongols is your second big empire to know. There are 4 Khanates. Genghis Khan, after he kind of goes through and conquers like almost the entire world, there's eventually split into 4 Khanates. There's the Golden Horde, which is Russia. There's the Yuan dynasty, which is China. The Chagatai is more Central Asia, and the Ilkhanate is the Middle East. And really the Mongols, the things to know about the Mongols is that they're also really big on trade. They're really big on conquest, right? They're just continuing to conquer different territories. They're nomadic. They don't have a major capital. They're really moving around with their conquests. And really, they're just like the largest land empire ever. The Mongols are pretty tolerant in terms of religion. They're not trying to like push any of their beliefs on their conquered territories. Their idea is more of like, we're going to conquer you. As long as you're okay with us staying in charge of you, then you can continue to do whatever you want. If you have a problem with us being in charge, we're going to kill you. Kind of how it went. So if you were cool with them being in charge and not being killed by them, then you could practice whatever you wanted. So here's a little bit more about the Mongols. They are probably your best example of a decentralized empire because they don't have that capital city. They don't have that like strong bureaucratic environment. They're much more, about local leadership. And they really are characterized by like a warrior culture, something that you see in the Aztecs as well. Their biggest accomplishment, they conquer most of Eurasia, largest land empire to ever exist, and the Silk Roads are going to come back to life because of the Mongols. So after the fall of Rome and Han, the Silk Roads are kind of in decline, but when the Mongols come back, they provide the like safety net, the security needed to actually have trade again. And this brings into this time period called the Pax Mongolica, and that's just kind of like the peace of the Mongols. And so the Mongols are really important for diffusing culture, which means they're helping to spread some of the culture that's happening in different regions. And then also the Chinese culture is preserved because the Mongols don't let them become like the Mongols. So they're actually, China is existing today because, in the same traditions of the classical era because of a preservation of culture in this time period. And so why do the Mongols fall? They're just totally overextended. There's too big of a region to cover. And so that is going to end up, leading to falls in different regions at different times. So they don't last for very long. They're kind of a quick blip in terms of history. But it's a pretty important influence that they have. So third, it would be the Byzantines. And the Byzantines are kind of your Eastern Rome, right? They're kind of the continuation of Rome. Western Rome falls in 476, but in Constantinople, the Roman tradition continues and looks a little bit different, but a lot of Roman influence will continue through the writings of Justinian, for example. He helped to codify all those Roman laws. The Byzantines are really focused on what was called Caesaropapism. This is an awesome key term to know because it really means like Caesar and the Pope. It's about ruling with church and state. That the state should have, full control of political aspects of things, and the church will have full control of religious aspects, but that they're really working together. And so in Byzantine Empire, it's Christianity, but it's not Roman Catholic Christianity, it's Eastern Orthodox. And so there is a shift there. The Byzantines spoke Greek. They share similar cultures with Persia. Justinian would be one of your most important people to know from the Byzantine Empire, and their capital city is Constantinople, which will become Istanbul today. They, like we mentioned, they really preserve the Roman and Greek cultures. There's lots of trade that's happening through Constantinople. The location of that is pretty ideal for trade in the Mediterranean. And then how do they fall? They're sacked by the Ottomans. So they fall in 1453, and that's the fall of Constantinople, and then the rise of the Ottoman Empire that happens right after them. So here is a picture of the Hagia Sophia, which was originally a church, and then today it's a mosque, but it's a massive example of architecture, Byzantine architecture built by Justinian. What's going on in China? So there's 3 Chinese dynasties in this time period: the Sui, the Tang, and the Song. The Sui dynasty, they're the ones that built the Grand Canal that connected the 2 regions. The Tang dynasty are important for kind of reinvigorating the civil service exam. And it's the Song dynasty that actually established paper money, just to give you one quick thing for each of them. But to really kind of focus in on the Tang and the Song, and I know the year is a little bit blocked there, but the Tang, they had, Empress Wu is an example of one of the leaders. She was one of the only, female leaders in China. They're extremely bureaucratic and have brought back the civil service exams. They innovate a lot, and one of the most important innovations from them is gunpowder. The reason why they fall is because of an entire decade of peasant rebellions that they're unable to sort of squash. The Song dynasty will rise right after, and they're very similar to the Tang. They're also bureaucratic, also use civil service exams. But one important thing is that foot binding begins in the Song dynasty. So that's where women would wrap their feet to be smaller. And then there's a ton of innovations that come out of the Song dynasty. Some important ones could be encyclopedias, junks, those are those massive ships, and then paper money. And they fall to the Mongols. So they are replaced by the Yuan dynasty, which are the Mongol dynasty right after them. Okay, so what's going on in the Americas in this time period? So there are the Mayans, the Aztecs, and the Incas. The Aztecs and the Incas you really focus on more in period 4, but a little bit about them here because they do start existing in this time period. The Aztecs are extremely large. They're not necessarily bureaucratic. They're a little bit more, local rulers, and they have one of the things that they practice is human sacrifice. That comes up a lot in knowing about the Aztec culture. Women in the Aztec culture had some power. They could actually inherit property, and that was really important, but they still were only given their main goal, their main purpose was the socialization of children, just like in other places as well. In the Inca Empire, this one had a really complicated road system. But something that's kind of important to know about them is that they didn't really believe in private property. And the reason for that is because they saw their ruler as a descendant from the gods and that the ruler owned everything on earth. And so the ruler owned it all. And so that's just a quick characteristic about the Incas. Women in the Inca society were really expected to work in the field, so they had actually more opportunity than some women in other societies because there were some jobs that were specific to women, and then also, of course, the socialization of children. And then you could actually pass property to daughters, so that was an important role of women in the Inca society. All right, and then finally, feudalism is another major player in this time, and we're going to see it in Europe, and then we're also going to see it in Japan. And they're very similar, but there's some differences. So let's look at European and Japanese feudalism. Both were rooted in the political and social structure, and so it was, not just politics, but also a social hierarchy as well. Both were rooted in an honor code, and then both had, arrangements that were really based on culture. It was very specific to their culture in terms of who you were in the, what role you played, also played a role in the culture that you had. And because they were both so intertwined into culture, they both last for a long time because it's so much a part of European and Japanese culture. So how are they different? Women in Europe were sort of admired for really feminine traits, and therefore had it a little bit easier than the women in Japan. Women in Japan lived harsher, more demeaning lives because they weren't idolized for their femininity. And so that is a difference in terms of the role of women in both of those places. Second, in Europe, the feudal contract was legally binding. So you were contracted to work for a certain amount of time. Whereas in Japan, it was based on loyalty, not on law. So that's another major difference between the two. So in terms of, key concept 3.2, these are the major players. These are the major empires. They're all, building states, and the way that they're structuring that looks a bit different. But they have a lot of common characteristics as well. You can see, in how the fact that they're bureaucratic, the fact that they have capital cities for most of them, how much culture is playing a role in state building is really important. And so there's some definite similarities you can see across these times, but there's also really unique things about each of them and how they built empires, how they built so much influence. So this was key concept 3.2. Stay tuned. I'm going to take you into key concept 3.3. That's all about economic productivity and its consequences. So let's, I'll see you in the next video. Hey, this is High Level History, and I'm Amanda Doemerall. If you're an AP World student, tell me how it's going in the comments below. And for more AP World content and review, be sure to subscribe to my channel and follow me on Twitter and Instagram at High Level History.